You learned treachery, Jorun gasped as his enhanced physique strained to compensate. Bannock laughed. I learned truth. He advanced again. Khan showed us that loyalty is a cage, that only blood matters, only the strength to take and endure. Bannock snarled and lunged forward. The honor guard parted as Blacklock stepped into the ruined chapel. Ceramite blackened from prior war, silentium inlays gleaming faintly, Indomitus roaring to life in his grip, the lash of redemption coiled at his side. Bannock saw him instantly, even across the carnage. The blood drinker's laughter deepened. So, he growled, the iron dog. Blacklock's voice was cold as voidstone. You burn worlds that cannot defend themselves. Bannock shrugged beneath layered brass plates. They bleed well. Blacklock advanced. And you call that strength, he said, eyes burning with quiet contempt. Bannock's helm tilted slightly. I call it worship. They met in the center of the hall. Indomitus screamed as it collided with Bannock's chainblade. The impact shattered the remaining stained glass windows in a concussive wave. Bannock was impossibly strong. Years of slaughter under Khorne's gaze had hardened him beyond baseline Astartes' limits. He fought with a berserker's fury, but guided by veteran instinct. He shifted mid-swing, angling blows to test armor seams. He used the bodies of fallen warriors as stepping stones to gain leverage. Khan had not merely inspired him, he had refined him. You endure, Bannock growled as their weapons locked. But endurance is not victory. He head-butted Blacklock with crushing force, fracturing the rim of the chapter master's helm. Blacklock staggered back a single step, then surged forward. The lash of redemption snapped out, barbs embedding into Bannock's shoulder plates. The power field flared violently, tearing brass runes from their settings. Bannock roared in rage and delight. Yes! He hissed. Fight like that. He ripped against the lash, dragging Blacklock toward him. The two collided again, in a hurricane of grinding teeth and crackling fields. Around them, stone dogs and blood drinkers continued their brutal duel, neither side yielding ground easily. As they fought, Bannock spoke between blows. At Scalathrax, I saw Khan carve down his own legion when they faltered. Indomitus bit into Bannock's thigh plating, tearing free a spray of molten ceramite. I saw him laugh as the weak died. Blacklock pivoted, driving a knee into Bannock's torso. And what did you learn? He demanded. Bannock slammed his chainblade down, forcing Blacklock to block. That the galaxy belongs to those who take it. He leaned closer and whispered. That loyalty to corpse thrones and dying empires is weakness. Blacklock's voice dropped to a growl. You misunderstand. He twisted the lash violently, unbalancing Bannock just enough. Endurance is not submission. He drove Indomitus upward into Bannock's chest plate. It is defiance. The chain fist chewed into brass and bone. Bannock howled, head thrown back, not in pain alone, but in savage exultation. Yes, he roared. Break me if you can. Bannock wrenched backward, tearing free from the chain fist's bite at the cost of chunks of armor and flesh. Blood, thick and dark, splashed across the chapel floor. He staggered once, then laughed. "You are worthy," he said, breathing hard. "Worthy of the betrayer's notice." Blacklock advanced again, but before the final blow could fall, the fortress shuddered violently. External vox screamed warnings. "Chapter Master," Virek 12's voice cut through the chaos. "Additional blood drinker vessels are targeting the primary reactor bastion." Banach grinned beneath his shattered helm. "I did not come to die, Blacklock." He slammed his chain blade into the floor, triggering a localized melter detonation. The explosion threw both warriors apart. Smoke filled the hall. When it cleared, Banach was already withdrawing toward a breach corridor, his surviving blood drinkers falling back in disciplined retreat. He paused at the threshold. "This is not the end," he called. "I will return, and when I do—" His gaze locked on Blacklock. "Bring me more skulls. I will save yours until last." Then he was gone, pulled back through a boarding corridor as blood drinker ships disengaged from orbit. The void battle raged for another hour before the renegades broke contact, translating back toward Furnace Point in a tide of warp fire. Carnassus burned, but it stood. Blacklock stood amid the wrecked chapel, armor cracked, blood staining the floor. Joran approached, wounded but alive. "He could have pressed harder." "Yes," Blacklock said. "He wanted something else." Sebastian's voice crackled through the vox from a safe distance. "I suspect he wanted to measure you." Blacklock looked toward Furnace Point, where red and green lightning now intertwined. "He has." Deep in the warp, Banach Baneblade stood upon the bridge of his battle barge, blood dripping from his armor. He flexed his wounded arm and laughed softly. "Khan," he murmured to the void, "I have found one who does not break." Somewhere in the immaterium, the distant echo of the betrayer's eternal war answered with thunder. The Corrale string now faced two predators, one of cold white silence, one of roaring blood. And between them, as metal lays between hammer and anvil, stood the stone dogs. The damage reports came in waves. Decks sealed, fires quenched, gene seed recovered where it could be. The dead counted, not aloud, but in silence, as was the way of the stone dogs. Blacklock stood once more in the Hall of Names. New sigils glowed faintly upon the black stone wall. Banach Baneblade had added to it, and not for the first time. It had begun almost 6,000 years earlier, when Furnace Point had first swollen from a navigational hazard into a prison. Warp routes collapsed without warning. Astropathic choirs screamed themselves into madness. Supply fleets vanished mid-translation. The Corrali string went dark to the wider Imperium. But the stone dogs endured, and into that isolation had come Banach. Not as a warlord, not yet. At first he had been a shadow, a single strike cruiser emerging briefly from the storm's edge, a sudden raid on an outer mining station, a handful of dead serfs, an ammunition vault gutted, Vox recordings filled with laughter and chainblade revs. Blacklock recalled reading the battle reports as a newly raised captain. The chapter master of that era, Vorthane Ironfell, had dismissed the attacks as opportunistic piracy. Blacklock had not. He was testing us, he had said. His tutor had nodded. He will bleed for it. The first true confrontation came at Cindervale, a Promethean refinery world clinging to Furnace Point's outer turbulence, vital to Karnassus's defense grid. When Banak struck, he did so with precision that belied madness. Blood drinkers' drop pods fell directly onto refinery spines. Fuel lines were ruptured deliberately. Firestorms swept across the plains as civilians burned alive. The stone dogs counterattacked in force. Blacklock imagined the red sky, the way the air itself would have screamed as burning promethium ignited. He wished he could have faced Banak there, if only briefly. The renegade had not worn Terminator armor then. His warband had been smaller, less adorned, still lethal. The armies had clashed amid the ruins of Refinery Spire 9. Banak had laughed as he fought. Good, he had roared, chain axe biting into a stone dog's pauldron. The storm gives us worthy prey. Ironfell had wounded him, cracked his helm, drawn blood. Banak had withdrawn laughing, refinery collapsing behind him. Cindervale had burned for a year. After that, Banak never sought decisive battle. He learned, though. He struck at weak points, training bastions, outlying watch stations, pilgrimage convoys trying desperately to reach Karnassus before the storm swallowed them. Each attack was timed with warp fluctuations. Banak riding the storm's moods like a predator riding ocean currents. The blood drinkers grew stronger, more numerous, more devout. In the last 1,000 years, Blacklock had led 3 punitive expeditions into Furnace Point, trying to hunt him down. Each time Banak slipped away, always laughing, always leaving bodies. The Stone Dogs had lost an entire reserve company during the ambush at Pyraxis Reach, when blood drinkers feigned retreat only to slam into the rear guard, with chain axes and melter charges. That was the day Blacklock had taken the lash of redemption from an orc war boss. That was the day he had realized isolation did not only breed endurance, it bred monsters. The most bitter memory came later. The night of broken howls, a massed blood drinker assault against the moon fortress Howlspire, one of Karnassus's outer defensive bastions. Banak had committed fully that time. 6 vessels, drop pods, falling like meteors. The stone dogs had held the walls, barely. Chaplain Yorval, a newly inducted reclusiarch, had been dragged down by blood drinkers in the chapel crypts, fighting until his crozier shattered. Ironfell had reached Banak amid the corpses. The duel had lasted minutes, brutal, even. When it ended, Banak had disengaged, dragging wounded brothers with him, refusing to abandon their skulls to the stone dogs. I will not waste them, he had snarled. Not yet. Howlspire had survived. But the lesson had been clear. Banak was not merely raiding. He was learning the stone dogs, their responses, their patterns, their limits. Back in the present, Blacklock traced the new names etched into the Hall of Names. Banak had always been there, lurking in the margins of every campaign, in every stretch of isolation where the warp cut them off and no help came. A test, a mirror. Jorun stood beside him. He has waited centuries for this, the brother captain said. Yes, Blacklock replied. He believes the storm was a crucible, Jorun paused. And you? Blacklock's hand tightened into a fist. I believe it was a warning. Sebastian's voice crackled faintly over the vox, unusually subdued. He didn't just come for blood this time, Darius. He came because the balance shifted. Necrons, white stars, broken rings. Blacklock turned from the wall. The furnace opened. And predators followed, Sebastian finished. Blacklock looked toward Furnace Point, now writhing with red and green lightning alike. Bannock Baneblade had stalked the Stone Dogs since the day they were cut off from the Imperium. 6,000 years of spite. Now the galaxy had returned, and with it, everything the storm had ever kept at bay. The Stone Dogs had endured the long isolation. They had survived cold silence and roaring blood. Now came the reckoning. Blacklock activated the command vox. All companies, he said. The hunt resumes. Somewhere within the warp, Bannock Baneblade sharpened his chain blade, scars fresh and grinning. And deep within the cold white shadows beyond real space, the architect recalculated again. 2 predators, 1 battlefield. The Coralai string would not survive them both. But the Stone Dogs intended to. The hunt did not begin with pursuit. It began with bait. Blacklock stood in the strategium as the hololithic projection of the Coralai string shifted under new overlays. Red for confirmed blood drinker sightings, white for lingering Necron signatures, amber for vulnerable Imperial worlds. 3 colors, 3 threats, 1 sector. Bannock will not strike at random now, Blacklock said. He has tasted Carnassus again. He will seek symbolic targets. Shrines, Jorun said immediately. Yes, Blacklock responded. The Stone Dogs were not merely wardens of space lanes and fortress walls. Across the string stood ancient reliquaries, chapels raised during the chapter's founding crusade, bastion shrines carved into asteroids and moons, each housing relics carried from their long-lost homeworld. Bannock remembered them. He had bled at 2. Sebastian leaned against the edge of the hololith, arms folded. If I were an egomaniacal disciple of the blood god, trying to provoke you into overextension, he said lightly, I would strike at something sacred and indefensible. Blacklock's gaze did not shift. The shrine of St. Corvain. Jorun nodded grimly. A monastery carved into the red rock moon of Elex Minor. No major garrison, a place of pilgrimage and remembrance. Sebastian winced. That's not bait. That's a promise. Blacklock turned. And we will answer it. Bannock did not disappoint. The shrine of St. Corvain burned under a crimson sky. Blood-drinker strikecraft screamed overhead, strafing cloisters and pilgrim caravans. Drop pods smashed into the central courtyard, shattering statues that had stood for millennia. The renegades did not merely kill. They desecrated. Skulls were mounted upon reliquary gates, blood smeared across icons of the Emperor. Chaplains were hunted deliberately. Bannock strode through the shrine's central nave, his armor now bearing fresh notches from his duel with Blacklock. He paused before the sarcophagus of St. Corvain, studying the carved likeness. So this is what you kneel to, he muttered. He raised his chain blade and stopped. A tremor ran through the moon. Not orbital bombardment, Not blood drinker engines, something deeper. The shrine's floor cracked. Green light bled upward through ancient stone. Bannock's helm tilted. Then he laughed. More blood, he said. Beneath Ilex Minor, a tomb complex stirred, long dormant, ignored during prior Necron awakenings as insignificant. The architect had re-evaluated it. The shrine of St. Corvain lay directly above a minor node, one now activated as a counterstroke. Necron constructs erupted from beneath the shrine in precise geometric waves. Necron warriors rose from shattered crypts. Destroyers skimmed through collapsing cloisters. Gauss fire cut through blood drinkers and pilgrims alike with impartial efficiency. For a heartbeat the slaughter paused, then it doubled. Red-armored renegades turned their fury upon metallic forms. Chain axes bit into living metal. Gauss beams flayed corrupted ceramite from flesh. Bannock threw back his head and roared in delight. Yes, he bellowed, carving a Necron immortal in half. This is war. The first Thunderhawk gunships punched through the moon's atmosphere as the shrine burned, and green lightning laced the sky. Blacklock watched the battlefield through magnified optics before giving the order. Deploy, he voxed calmly. Stone dogs descended into hell. They landed between two fronts, Necron phalanxes advancing from below, and blood drinkers rampaging through the ruins. Jorun's voice cut across the vox. Primary objective? Blacklock's answer was immediate. Preserve the relic vault. Sebastian's ship remained in high orbit, sensors scanning the chaotic energy signatures below. Darius, he transmitted, you're walking into a three-sided meat grinder. Yes, Blacklock replied. The courtyard became a storm of iron, brass, and emerald light. Stone dogs formed disciplined firing lines, bolters roaring into advancing Necron ranks. Devastators targeted destroyers weaving through the air. Terminators crashed into blood drinkers, who mistook them for easy prey. They were not. Blacklock advanced toward the shrine's inner sanctum. He saw Bannock immediately, locked in brutal combat with a towering Necron Lich Guard, chainblade chewing into phase-shielded metal. The renegade warlord sensed him and pivoted mid-swing. Even across chaos, their gazes met. Bannock grinned. You brought friends, Bannock cried through gritted teeth. You brought corruption, Blacklock replied. A Gauss beam sliced between them, vaporizing a blood drinker attempting to flank. For a fleeting moment, the battlefield aligned, Stone Dog and Blood Drinker, back to back, as Necron constructs surged from the crypt breach. Bannock hacked through a warrior and laughed. Truce, Iron Dog? No. Blacklock resisted the urge to spit. Good. They fought anyway. Blacklock drove Indomitus through a Necron torso, ripping it apart before pivoting to intercept Bannock's sudden strike. The chain blade slammed against his pauldron, sparks exploding. Bannock leaned close. You see, he snarled, this is what the galaxy truly is. Behind them, Jorun's hammer crushed a destroyer from the air. Necron reinforcements poured upward through widening breaches. The tomb complex was escalating response to all hostile forces equally. The architect's influence was faint, but present. Warforms adjusting priorities, targeting command figures, isolating clusters. Sebastian's voice cut sharply across the channel. Energy spike beneath the shrine. The node is attempting full activation. If the tomb complex awakened fully, Ilex Minor would fracture, and everything on it with it. Blacklock made the calculation instantly. "Joroon, hold the outer line." He turned toward the central crypt breach. Banach blocked his path. "You leave?" the renegade mocked. "Yes, to fight metal ghosts instead of me." Blacklock's voice was cold. "You are not the only threat." Banach laughed, and then, unexpectedly, stepped aside. "Do not die down there," he growled. "I would hate to lose you to something so joyless." Blacklock did not respond. He descended into the crypt. The tomb node chamber was smaller than Gorgon's abyss, but no less dangerous. A central obelisk pulsed with white-green light as it synchronized with distant Necron networks. Warforms activated in rings. Blacklock moved without hesitation. The lash of redemption snapped outward, ensnaring one construct and hurling it aside. Indomitus tore into the obelisk's lower seam. Above, the battle raged. Blood drinkers and stone dogs, now fighting separately against encroaching Necron forces. Banach stood atop a shattered statue, chainblade dripping oil and blood alike. He watched as green light intensified from the crypt below. Then he did something unexpected. He raised his chainblade high. "Blood drinkers!" he roared. "Break the metal!" His warband obeyed. For the first time, renegade Astartes coordinated, however briefly, with Imperial Space Marines against a common foe. Chain axes tore through Necron ranks. Stormbolters roared in disciplined bursts. And below, Blacklock drove Indomitus deep into the obelisk's core. "Now," he voxed. Orbital lances fired from Sebastian's ship, precise, narrow strikes punching through the shrine's roof and into the node chamber. The obelisk detonated. The tomb complex collapsed inward, cutting off further Necron emergence. The remaining constructs phased out in fractured retreat. The shrine of St. Corvain stood half-ruined, but intact. Blood drinkers began withdrawing almost immediately. Banach wiped oil and blood from his blade. He looked down at Blacklock, emerging from the smoking crypt. "Another time," Banach called. "Yes," Blacklock replied. The renegade grinned. "I prefer it when it's just us." Then the blood drinkers disengaged, boarding craft lifting off, through a sky still streaked with warp light. Stone dogs held the ruined shrine. Sebastian's voice returned, softer now. "You just fought beside a Khorne warlord." Blacklock removed his helm. "No," he said quietly. He looked toward the horizon where red ships vanished into the storm. "We survived the same enemy. In the darkness between stars, the architect registered the failure of the Ilex Minor node. 3 forces, unstable interactions. The equation grew more complex, and complexity required escalation. The furnace burned red. The void flickered white. And the coralized string stood on the edge of a war that no longer had sides, only predators. The shrine of St. Corvain smoldered for 6 days. Stone Dog's tech marines labored beside trembling human laborers to shore up collapsing vaults and resanctify cracked reliquaries. The bones of St. Corvain were recovered from beneath a fallen archway, blackened but intact. The relic vault had held. that mattered. Blacklock stood alone on the shattered balcony overlooking the courtyard, where Blood Drinker and Necron remains lay in twisted heaps. Red ceramite, living metal, ash, 3 enemies, 1 battlefield. He turned a fragment of brass plate over in his gauntlet, torn from Banak's armor during their brief clash above the crypt. It bore a scratched rune of corn layered over older, partially obscured chapter heraldry. The blood talons, Banak had not scraped it fully away. Blacklock dropped the fragment to the stone. "Report," he voxed. Jorun's voice came calm but edged with strain. "Casualties heavy but sustainable. Necron presence on Elex Minor has fully phased out. Blood Drinker fleet translated immediately after disengagement. Vector suggests Furnace Point." "They retreat to the storm," Blacklock said. "As always," Jorun replied, voice filled with thinly veiled contempt. Sebastian's voice followed, patched in from orbit. "Except something's changed." Blacklock waited. "The warp around Furnace Point isn't just turbulent now," Sebastian continued. "It's structured. I'm seeing repeating interference patterns, like something is shaping the tides." White light flickered faintly along the horizon of the moon, barely perceptible. Blacklock felt it too. A shift. The architect was no longer reacting. It was preparing. Deep within hidden Necron strata across multiple worlds, white harmonics propagated in silent pulses. The Ilex minor node had failed. Direct confrontation between variable Blacklock and renegade entity Banak Baneblade had produced unstable but survivable outcomes. New calculation branches unfurled. The architect's analysis resolved toward a new conclusion. Conflict between predators increases systemic destabilization. Destabilization accelerates reclamation probability. If the stone dogs and blood drinkers would not eliminate one another, they could be encouraged. The white signal pulsed outward through Furnace Point, subtle, precise, targeted. Aboard his battle barge, Banak Baneblade stood before a viewing slit that looked directly into the churning madness of Furnace Point. The storm roared like a living thing. He welcomed it. He had been forged in it. A World Eater warband had once dragged his crippled strike cruiser into these tides centuries ago. Khan himself had walked his decks during that doomed crusade into the halo stars, laughing as brothers turned chainblade against brother during the madness of Scalathrax. Banak remembered that night vividly. The ice world burning, Khan carving through loyalist and traitor alike, with Gorechild screaming. The lesson burned into his mind. There is only battle. There is only the strength to endure it. The rest is illusion. Now, as Furnace Point churned, Banak saw something new within its depths. White light, not warp flame. Something colder, structured. It flickered like a distant star glimpsed through madness. He frowned, then grinned. "More," he murmured. Behind him, his lieutenants argued over the next target. Another shrine. Perhaps Karnassus again. Banak silenced them with a raised hand. "No." He gestured toward the storm. "There is something else.